I can't believe as we begin another Stanley Cup final, Randy Hahn, that it's been 10 years since we, as covering the San Jose Sharks, were part of getting to the fourth and final round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. As we reminisce about a decade ago, I actually want to start in that regular season. The Sharks were coming off a rare year prior where they missed the postseason, and then even the regular season of going to the final was a 46-30-6 record. It was very pedestrian. It was kind of a surprise that they actually got that far that year.
Yeah, and again, we're seeing this throughout the history of the Stanley Cup playoffs. The President's Trophy team rarely gets to the final, right?
Yeah.
And even go back when the Sharks won the President's Trophy and got knocked out in the first round by Anaheim, and then before that, when St. Louis won the President's Trophy, and the Sharks knocked them out as the eighth seed. And you're right. I don't think we felt like this is going to be a Cup final team. Obviously, the opportunity was there, and then eventually the path came to send the Sharks to the Cup final. But no, you're right. It was another season with a good team. We still had Thornton, we had Erik Karlsson, we had so many big pieces, Logan Couture, Pavelski, we know all the principles. So, the opportunity was certainly there. We had the ilk of players and the goaltending in Martin Jones, everyone felt to be able to do that. But you're right. It wasn't top of mind when the regular season ended, so that, we're going to the Cup.
I think I've covered 6 or 7 or 8 different Sharks head coaches. Now, you've seen all of them, but Pete DeBoer had just taken over in San Jose. And I got to say, I feel like of all the players we'll eventually talk about here that made a difference for that team and got him that far, man, I felt like Pete DeBoer was really good for that group at that time.
Yeah, he was. And he's proven that throughout his history of being that coach that is a good chance for you to get your team, if not over the finish line, because he hasn't done that yet,
right,
but to get you deep and take you to that next level. And the next level, obviously, for the Sharks, which was the one they had never gotten to, was get to the Stanley Cup. And then the next level after that, obviously, is to win it. But you got to get there first. And Pete had shown in his pedigree, taking New Jersey there, and then taking the Sharks there, and then later on moving on Dallas,
Vegas
with the Stars. Yeah, he's probably not the coach you want to have a young rebuilding team with. Yeah. And he probably wouldn't take one of those jobs because that's just not how he's wired. But yeah, he was a big change, a big acquisition. Steve Spott as well, and the rest of that staff. They were definitely difference makers, and Pete definitely deserves a lot of credit for getting that team as far as they got.
It's crazy. We think about now the Golden Knights being in the Stanley Cup final, and Tomas Hertl and Joel Ward were teammates on the Sharks when we were watching them go to the Stanley Cup final 10 years ago. Now Wardo's a coach on the bench for Tomas in Vegas. For San Jose to get to the fourth round, they beat the Kings in 5 games. They beat the Preds in a Game 7, beat the Blues in Game 6, and obviously eventually lost to the Pittsburgh Penguins. But individually, Logan Couture doing what he always did in the playoffs. 30 points in 24 playoff games that postseason. 24 extra games that year. Bernsey had 24 points in 24 games. He and Pavelski were such a great tandem. Pavelski had 14 goals, led the way that postseason. Jumbo had 21 points. Joel Ward had 7 goals those playoffs. Patrick Marleau also had 13 points. So it was a star-laden team that also, I think, Randy, stayed healthy a majority of those playoffs. You get your bumps, you get your bruises. But luck and health did play in their favor a little bit that postseason.
Yeah, it did. And that's what you need, right? Yeah. I mean, look what we've seen with Colorado this year.
Yeah,
Cale Makar is significantly less than 100%, and all of a sudden, and I still think you can break down. And I'm not an X's and O's expert, but boys, I watched those games, and Cale Makar wasn't himself. Neither was that team because of that, because of how he drives offense and how good he is defensively. Those both sides of the puck, they were just decimated with his absence, and then later in the series, McKinnon getting hurt too. But you're right; you've got to have that injury luck. You've got to have hopefully not more than one series that goes 7.
Right.
So you get some rest.
Right.
You're not beat up. I really think this year Montreal having to go back-to-back Game 7s in the first 2 rounds had a lot to do with the way they ended up playing against Carolina. They just didn't look like the same team. Now, give Carolina a ton of credit, because on the flip side, they had a ton of rest. And the kind of style they play is so difficult to play against. But I think had Montreal not had to go back-to-back 7 games, they would have put up a much better fight against Carolina in that series. So that's another element you have to have, is not be forced to the limit 2 or maybe even 3 times before you get to the final, to give yourself a better chance. And health plays into it as well as rest there as well. So, yeah, the Sharks were fortunate with health. They were fortunate in that they just had the one Game 7 against Nashville. But in the end, they were unfortunate in that they ran into something that they couldn't match in that series, and that was team speed. And I remember after Game 1, and we weren't doing the games, of course. We didn't do anything after the first round because of the way the TV contracts are structured. But I remember after Game 1 of the final, Jamie Baker and I were there and doing pre and post, and I think you were with us. And we were all doing that sidebar programming on NBC Sports California, and Jamie's saying, "Uh-oh, we're in trouble," because of how fast Pittsburgh was. And, we had some team speed, but we couldn't match theirs. And in the end, I think if you break down that series, that was the Sharks' undoing, unfortunately.
I also wanted to add this in there, too. I agree with you on speed. I felt like Pittsburgh was so good net front on both ends of the ice. Just that scoring area that they dominated, that the Sharks just had trouble with. And I feel like, Randy, it's one thing if you got to the Stanley Cup Final and you lost to a team where you're like, we're better than them. But I feel like in that series and just the way those 6 games played out, like Pittsburgh, I hate to say it, was just the better team in that series. So I don't feel as bad. It wasn't like the Sharks gave up something. They just lost to a team that was ideal at that point.
Well, and then a team that won again the next year. It wasn't like they made a fluke run.
Right.
They came back and defended their Stanley Cup championship.
Right.
And that's, as we know, very rare.
I remember leaving the tank Game 6 final, game of the hockey season that year, and it didn't hit me. We had done the whole post-game show, and we talked about the loss, and we saw the faces and expressions and getting that close, and it hadn't sunk in yet. I'll tell you what made it real for me was walking out of the building across the visitor side of the building and smelling the residue of champagne, and to think like it could have been on this side, and we could be getting ready for a parade right now. And I feel like it didn't hit me like it was playoffs were so deep and our beards were so long and it was just so much going on that you didn't really digest. But I feel like in the 10 years since then, what I've realized is, dang, it's hard to get to that 4th round, and you want to capitalize on it when you get there because you don't know how many chances you're going to get. Even getting back to that 4th round is so difficult. What sunk in for you?
Well, my first recollection is a weird one, but I really am passionate about this. And I get what happened, but it still makes me disappointed. As soon as the game ended and the process began, the process began at presenting the Stanley Cup to the Pittsburgh Penguins in our rink, which made it, that was tough. I saw so many fans leaving. And fathers with their sons, mothers with their daughters, walking up the stairs and leaving the rink. And I'm like, no, do not do this. Even if you lose the Stanley Cup at home, you've got to stay and watch the presentation of the Stanley Cup, because it is such a meaningful thing. It always brings tears to my eyes, and it did that night too. And it means so much to the players, even the ones who've won it before, like a Crosby or a Malkin or a Letang that night, but especially to the ones who are experiencing it for the first time. And I think as a fan of a team who hasn't won it yet, it's important to see it too, for how much it means and how much it will mean for your team. Now, I get the mentality that, screw them. They're going to celebrate in our rink. I'm out of here. But I just think force yourself to stay. You'll be glad you did. Years later, you'll remember that moment. Maybe when the Sharks hoist the Stanley Cup, when that happens, you'll flash back and say, wow, I remember what it meant, and now it's so much sweeter. So that's my first memory of that night. And then it's obviously the disappointment of getting that close and knowing how hard it was to get there. But I think in the end, it was tempered with the reality of how good a team we lost to.
Yeah.
No regrets. Our guys laid it on the line, and we just were beaten by a better team.
I'll end it with this. You mentioned maybe it's the setup for when the Sharks ultimately, hopefully, do get that chance to win the Stanley Cup. Maybe it was almost better to have experienced this, to understand this. If you win it the first time, I don't know that you fully grasp what it's like to be on the losing side of getting to a fourth and final round. And I feel terrible for the names that I just listed there. Logan Couture, not playing anymore. Brent Burns, we don't know the state of his career, moving forward. Had a chance this year with the Avs. Pavelski has retired. Thornton has retired. Joel Ward has retired. Patrick Marleau has retired. All those guys didn't get that chance together. Some never got the chance to ultimately win the Stanley Cup. So as much as I do feel bad for those individuals, if I'm looking at Sharks fans who are here for the long term, maybe in some way, this was the setup to really appreciating it like nothing else if and when it eventually does happen in our lifetimes.
Yeah, it's been a decade now, as you said, and we, got to a conference final in 2019 against St. Louis, and then in the end, that was not to be. In another one of those years where we had a lot of luck, they changed rules because of Game 7 against Vegas, and then later in the next round against Colorado,
the hand pass in
front of the net, and so on. And even with those incredible breaks that went the Sharks' way, they ran into a St. Louis team, and every time I hear the song Gloria, I still have to turn it down. But yeah, you cherish those moments. You remember how special they are. But I got a feeling, Brodie, we're gonna be there again, and that's again what makes this era of Sharks hockey, with the fans who've been around since the beginning, the fans who were around in 2016, and I know you know this, all the new fans that have come on board, even within just the last year. All of us together are going to have a great opportunity to watch this team play in a Stanley Cup again. I really believe it's going to happen soon.